Welcome into the Sunday edition of Beyond the Darkness. I am Tim Dennis, in for Dave Schrader today. He is on set on the Holzer Files, and kind of an interesting story. Sometimes things don't go the way you want with TV programming. By the way, happy Super Bowl Sunday. Good luck to your team if your team is the San Francisco 49ers or the Kansas City Chiefs. I have no dog in the fight. So either way, good luck to your team. But yeah, interesting story. Sometimes when you're on set, things aren't quite going the way you'd like. And so Dave's, Dave would like to be here today. And he really did want to talk to our guest today. I sincerely do mean that he wanted to talk to our guest today. We'll get into that in a second as Dave wanted to talk to our guest on Midnight in the Desert too. But we'll get to it when we get to it. Our guest is Mike Ricksecker. Sorry, I have to explain something. If I occasionally clear my lungs, we just got back from the Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea Part 2, which was the vacation of a lifetime. If you weren't there, folks, shame on you, because we had an absolutely amazing time. You, of course, heard the shows last weekend from the Ultra Bliss Lounge. We did a Supernatural News and Parashare show from the Bliss Ultra Lounge there on the ship. And then, of course, we did from the Stardust Theater, we did the show with John Moxley, which had 472 Fortnite words, if you will, or F words. Which was an amazing show. And again, if you get a chance to see the visual of John Moxley doing his Sasquatch impression, it's something to behold. Now, I did get the Jericho Cruise flu, which I think is 10 times worse than a coronavirus, I'm pretty sure. It was as I told Dave, it was the only, on True Crime Tuesday, the only flu where you had an upper respiratory deal and a lower explosion at the same time. It was quite, that's the only colorful way I can put it. And as I told our guest, Mike Ricksecker, off air before we jumped on here, I don't think your phlegm is supposed to be pink. So I think I've exploded a lung. But we're here. We're here on a Sunday, and we're here to talk shadow people. So, yeah. I think I'll seek medical treatment afterwards. I think that's what we'll do. But next year, it's already been announced. Triple whammy. And I believe Beyond the Darkness is part of it. February 1st to the 5th. Just go to ChrisJerichoCruise.com, I believe. Or JerichoCruise.com. I know that one works. Or, of course, darknessevents.com. Darknessevents.com. In order to check out Triple Whammy. Because we're going to be part of that deal, too. I'm telling you, you'll have one more shot at this deal, at least. I know that. February 1st through the 5th. This time, Grand Bahama, or Great Bahama. Is it Great Bahama or Grand Bahama Island? That's the next one. Triple Whammy. It's going to be amazing. And we'll bring more paranormal stuff to it. This time, we also did ghost stories off the back of the ship as we were coming back into Miami. This time, we'll figure out something even better for you. We'll have, I don't know, maybe this time we'll summon the ghost of some great Bahamian spirit. It's got to get bigger and better somehow. Dave and I will have to figure it out. I don't know how, but we'll figure it out somehow for Triple Whammy. Also, we have some great big changes ahead. Obviously, you're hearing this program come hell or high water. and you figured out how to hear this program, and your head is spinning going, what the heck is going on with you guys? Keep in touch with darknessradio.com or with our social media, because there are some huge changes in store for Darkness Radio, Beyond the Darkness. I know it seems confusing right now, kids, but trust us. It's going to be huge, guys. We've got some huge stuff on the horizon for Beyond the Darkness. Let's just say we've worked out some great stuff for you guys coming up. Between the Holzer Files and Beyond the Darkness, it's going to be a great 2020 for us. We really are looking at some great expansion for the show, and we're going to bring on some great guests, starting with Mike here, and we're bringing on bigger guests and greater guests for you, bigger topics. We have a bigger and better reach coming for you guys. You're going to find us in more formats coming up. And so there's going to be, let's just say, an expansion of Beyond the Darkness. So an expansion of the darkness, put it that way. I think you guys will be pleased. You'll be very pleased with what you're going to see out of Beyond the Darkness here in 2020. So we're pleased. We actually we're smiling from ear to ear. So I think you guys are going to be pleased as well. It's just a little bit of an awkward transition period here in February, and then I think in March we'll pick it right back up here, and you guys will be very, very pleased as to what's going on here. So there you go. Just stick with it, and we promise you it's going to be some good stuff. Let's get to our program today, shall we? Because we've got some good stuff coming up here in the next hour and a half with our guest, Mike Ricksecker. Let's bring him in now. The book is A Walk in the Shadows, a complete guide to shadow people. And without saying too much here, Mike, let's bring you in now and talk a little bit about your journey. You know, shadow people are kind of... let's just say a strange and anomalous lot, in that a lot of people speculate as to what they are and where they come from. You know, some people say, well, is it ghost-like in nature? Is it alien in nature? Is it demonic in nature? I want to start, Mike, with you and your journey, your paranormal journey, and how you came to come face to face with shadow people in your particular journey with shadow people. First of all, welcome into the program, Mike Ricksecker. How are you, sir?
Yeah, Tim, thanks for having me on. Happy to be a part of the expanding darkness here. Doing pretty well, enjoying the day.
Good to hear. With you, I'll ask you first off, your first paranormal experience. How did you come about? I mean, we all have our first paranormal experience, and what was yours?
Well, mine was with a shadow person, which is, you know, very apropos as to why I ended up writing the book. I've had a lot of different shadow experiences over the years, but the very first one that I had, I was about 8 or 9 years old, woke up in the middle of the night, and in the corner of my room, there was what we call a shadow person standing there. Of course, I had no idea at the time that that's what it was and that's what you called it or anything like that. I just saw this tall, dark figure in my room and thought there was an intruder in the house and was about to kill me. You know, that's about what you think at 8 or 9 years old. I'd seen enough movies at that point in time that I knew I had probably enough time to just gasp and I was a goner, you know, however it was going to snuff me out, you know, I was going to be done. So I tried to scream, my mouth open, but nothing came out. And it ended up doing the most unusual thing. It actually came up to my bed, leaned over, it took me by the wrists, and it crossed my arms across my body, and then it ran off down the hall, and of all places, into a closet. So at that point, found my voice, found my legs, got up, ran off to my parents' bedroom, screaming, ranting, and raving about what had happened. Of course, they tried to just console me, told me that I'd had a bad dream, which I knew I hadn't. I was awake for this whole thing. But they're being good parents and trying to calm me down. So that was my first major shadow person experience, my first paranormal experience. What really kind of launched me into the paranormal, though, was more of when I was a
Well, let me stop you real quick, Mike. Now you say crossed your arms in what direction? Like in an X or like a cross, or how so?
Yeah, like an X. So I had wondered for years what this may have been, why it did this. I had somebody a few years ago suggest to me that perhaps this thing thought that I was dead and was putting me into a burial pose, like the old ancient Egyptians with a crook and flail, kind of crossing my arms like that. When looking at those old sarcophagi, I would say that my arms would have been a little bit higher up, like closer to the neck than down across the torso where you see those images.
Interesting. Okay, so the person who had told you this thought that maybe it had the shadow person had misconstrued you for being dead, but at the time you had seen the shadow person, were you in fact asleep, or were you awake when you first saw it?
I was awake when I first saw it. I had no idea how long it had been standing there. Apparently, it came into the room while I was asleep, and I woke up while it was in the room. And it's kind of one of those, and I've tried to, when people talk about sleep paralysis and things like that, and they're waking up and seeing these things, I've related it to like when you're a parent and you have a child into the room and they just stand there at the side of the bed. they don't like make a move to try to wake you up. They just stand there. My kids were notorious for this. And you just kind of wake up because you sense that presence. I think that's kind of what happened here. Is I sensed that there was a presence in my room, and I woke up, and boom, there it was.
You just brought a totally different perspective on shadow people to me when you mention that, and when you bring up the ancient Egyptian perspective of shadow people, immediately I think underworld, and I think. Not of underworld such as hell or but like Hades in the underworld. Not a hellish underworld, but in the I'm trying to put this in a perspective that our listeners could think of, but a pagan Hades underworld where supposedly the dead would go to and be put in. Did they expound any more about what that shadow person, or where the origin of where that shadow person might have come from?
Not really. I mean, that was her impression that, and this was a psychic medium that I had done another show with. And okay. Ironically enough, it was like maybe a year later, somebody else suggested the same thing. But I guess the idea here, and A Walk in the Shadows covers a lot of different possibilities as to who and what these things may be. But in this case, it would be the sense of somebody that is, outside the realm of space and time, that, some sort of interdimensional being that perhaps, comes from or has spent some time in that realm with the ancient Egyptians, or maybe even was in a realm that had inspired the ancient Egyptians to take on their ceremonial practices. Because the ancient Egyptians believed in there being different parts to the soul, 7 different parts to the soul. And one of them, the Kabit, was the shadow part of the soul that actually remained here on Earth after the rest passed on.
Interesting.
So a lot of different interesting perspectives we could explore with shadow people here.
Because the way you described that whole scenario, it almost sounded like that shadow was a bit out of time, like it was. Words are escaping me. Words is hard today, Mike.
That's all right. You're dealing with phlegm, so I get it.
I am, yeah, pinkish phlegm in my lungs, which is alarming. But it's almost like that shadow was out of time. The only thing that comes up in my mind is that it was out of time looking at you almost like you should have been in its time. And it almost like it was supposed to be putting you to rest, or like you should have been something that it was putting to rest. I don't know. It was weird. The way you described that, almost like it was supposed to be putting a dead body to rest. It was bizarre. The way you described it, it was almost like it was.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea. With this possible scenario, is that it thought that I was dead for whatever reason. I have no idea, and it was basically, and we don't ever think about something like this with shadow people, basically trying to honor me and put me in the proper ceremonial pose for burial or being placed in a tomb or something like that.
Weird. I'm sorry, I had cut you off. You were starting to talk about the second.
Yeah. No, and I totally get it, because that's it's a very intriguing thing that happened to me when I was very young. The second time, because your original question was, what really got me into the paranormal, my first experience or experiences. The second one was when I was 13 years old, and I had just moved from that house in Massachusetts to Ohio. And, this was really the time where I started exploring things that were more supernatural in nature. My mother had even done, you mentioned the Holzer files. My mother had even done something really interesting when we moved out of that house in Massachusetts. She bought me the book Yankee Ghosts by Hans Holzer as an interesting way to remember where I had come from. So, and I was reading that book all the way on the drive from Massachusetts to Ohio, and realizing, oh my gosh, these stories are actually real. They're not just ghost stories. So I ate that book up. But when we moved into that house and I'm unpacking boxes and putting things away, I kept seeing something in my doorway. And, it was tall, dark, shadowy in nature, kind of translucent. And I'd turn and look at it, and then it would dart off down the hall. And this happened several times. So I ended up asking my mom about it. And I guess at that point, she thought I was old enough to maybe hear a little truth. And she told me that she had seen this thing as well. So it was, a great moment of affirmation that, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm actually seeing this thing. But it wasn't, it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't harmful. It was just kind of there peering in the door. So I nicknamed it Tom, as in like peeping Tom. And so anytime I'd see it there in the doorway and I'd look and I'd be like, hey, Tom, and, it'd dart off down the hall. So that happened for maybe like the first 3 or 4 months that we lived in that house, and then the activity just subsided. But so my first couple of real paranormal experiences happened to be with shadow people.
I'm curious how you get comfortable enough with a shadow person to name it. I guess to me, I don't see myself becoming comfortable enough with a specter that's corporeal enough to be comfortable enough to name it. I mean, something where I get an eerie enough feeling that I feel it. I don't know that I get comfortable with it.
Well, and maybe that was just the 13-year-old in me, and just maybe not knowing better or what have you. But I mean, honestly, even looking back and as an adult, we don't know who or what these things are, but at least for the most part, some of them, however, are human entities, and I've actually seen that evidence. Aside from all the stories, I've seen it with my own eyes. And I don't know if this thing's name really was Tom or what have you, or even if it was a human spirit. But if it was, there's no reason to believe that it's necessarily a harmful human. They're kind of the same way when they cross, or when they pass over into the next realm. And, they're somehow sharing this plane of existence with us, but they still have their personality. And this may have been, I don't know, a confused person or somebody that once lived there. No idea. But yeah, I just I got a little playful with it.
Which I don't blame you. I guess there's gallows humor in every situation. Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever have playful moments with Tom? I mean, were there ever situations where Tom showed his sense of humor?
Not really.
No?
Just kind of, I mean, I guess a lot of people would consider it just creepy. Somebody standing in your doorway and looking in. And, but I would say, that type of behavior to me is timid. When you look at somebody and they decided to, run away, that's a timid person. So I don't really consider that dangerous.
Was there ever a moment, especially, as teenagers, we tend to have sleepovers or, we have friends over. And was there ever moments where you would have friends over and they would see Tom or they would see these different shadow people and they'd be like, what the heck's going on in your house, dude?
Well, what's interesting, see, I never considered that a haunted house because it only lasted for like the first 3 or 4 months that I was there. But what's really interesting, something I'd totally forgotten about, a friend of mine from back at that time reached out to me here just the other week, and he's the guy that was with me on what I consider my first unofficial paranormal investigation, where we'd gone to a friend's house and she thought it was haunted, so we're checking it out. And he was extremely sensitive, and things happened to him there that I'd never seen before. And so we're chatting a little bit, just kind of catching up, and I was like, hey, do you remember this incident? Because I talk about it all the time. And he's like, yeah, I remember that. And then he asked me, hey, do you remember the little boy ghost at your house? And it's something I had totally forgotten about, that there was one night where he was staying over and he kept talking about this little boy that he was seeing and was coming over by the bedside to play with him. And it's something I totally forgotten about because I never saw this little boy, but he had. So that's one moment there where I can say, yeah, there is somebody that saw something at that house other than my mother and I.
So he saw this little boy ghost, but he didn't identify any name or what it looked like, or
no, he didn't have a name. Not a real firm description. It wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't Tom, because it showed up to him as an actual apparition and not the shadow that I saw. And the shadow that I saw looked more like adult size in nature anyway.
Interesting. Wow. Now, you said some of these shadow people are actually human, and you said that you had evidence to kind of back that up. What is it that you found that's backed up that these things can actually be human from time to time?
Yeah, I guess what I mean by that is evidence of my own eyes.
Okay.
I know I misspoke a little bit there. So yeah, evidence of my own eyes. I actually do have a photograph of a wonderful shadow person in a school that is about child size. So if you want to get paranormal evidence, there's that. But I've heard a lot of stories over the years about the possibility of some of these shadow spirits being human. A good friend of mine, Rob Guttrow, talks about his aunt, and his story's featured in the book as well. But last year, and I had been on the fence on this for a while. For a long time, I just kind of split the two up. Nope, shadow people are just straight up interdimensional beings, and human spirits are human spirits. They don't cross each other. But hearing like Rob's story and others throughout the years, I kind of gave a little credence to that. Like, okay, maybe some of these shadows are human spirits. But last summer, and we host a Paracon in June at the Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois. Mm-hmm. And we have a paranormal investigation that we do on Saturday nights. And it was just winding down toward the end of that investigation. So just a few of us left in the group that I was heading up. And we're in the top floor of the old hotel, which is an abandoned section of the hotel. It's no longer used. And we're in what they call Pearl's room. It's a room that has a confirmed suicide with a woman named Pearl, and a lot of people, including us, have interacted with Pearl up there. So we're doing a little EVP work. Well, we keep hearing these noises coming from down the one hallway. So we go out there, and taking a look down the hall, see what's going on, and there's this black smoke that starts to billow up at the end of the hall. And we're watching it. It's coming closer, and it starts doing something a little unusual. It starts like creeping up the right-hand side of the wall, and it'll creep back down, and then creep back up the right side of the wall, creep back down, and it's coming closer the whole time. And it started to form up into a shape and actually ended up becoming and morphing into the apparition of a little girl. And there are stories in the one room off to the one side of that hall of a little girl spirit being in that room. We've tried to interact with her before and never got anything. But this apparently was that girl. We were trying to coax her a little bit closer. There were 5 of us here, and we all saw her. So it was really interesting to me actually seeing something that was a shadow form into an actual apparition, which kind of gave me confirmation. Okay, yeah, some of these shadows that we're seeing really are human spirits. I just saw one turn into the other.
You got me thinking about something. And I want to throw this by you. And I know this buddy of mine doesn't necessarily listen to our show, so I'll throw this by you too. And I won't say his name, so he won't necessarily know either. It's just you, me, and a few thousand people who are listening.
All right.
A few hundreds of thousands of people who are listening. So I have a friend whose brother passed away, and it was rather tragic circumstances. It was a sudden heart attack. And he's talked to me before. And I know for a fact, I shouldn't say I know for a fact, but having talked to a psychic friend of mine who, I should say I'm rather strongly believe she's pretty accurate. She's pretty dead on when she does speak. Okay. I think she's pretty accurate. I'll put it that way. And I know I can hear the eye rolls right now, like slot machines. Ding, ding, ding. I believe he's crossed over. Put it this way. He has visited me in a dream. I'll put it that way. So I believe he's crossed over, but this friend of mine says that in his house he sees shadows. And he had always believed, he's not much of a believer. He doesn't subscribe to any dogma whatsoever. He has no belief in anything. In fact, he doesn't believe in anything in the paranormal. But he and I talk.
Okay.
And he says, yet around my house, every once in a while I see shadows. And he keeps asking if those shadows are his brother. I tell him no, because I don't believe those shadows are his brother. Yet the other day, he brought it up yet again. I keep seeing these shadows. I think it's my brother. I said, I don't think they are. I really don't. And I brought it up to the psychic. And I said, do you think these shadows are his brother? And she goes, I don't think these shadows are his brother. I really don't. But now, with you bringing this up, I don't know. Is it possible? And I want to throw this by you, Mike, and just with the extensive involvement you've had with shadow people, do you think, and I'll just throw this your way, do you think it's possible that someone could have crossed over and yet can still come back and appear in shadow form?
That's a good question. The one story that I provide in the book, like I mentioned earlier from Rob Guttrow, his aunt that appeared to him as a shadow, basically she wanted him to deliver a message to his mother, and she had appeared in shadow form, but she had not yet crossed over. And it's interesting that you mentioned the dream visitations, because my grandparents have visited me, and I'm pretty darn sure they had crossed over because my grandfather had been around visiting the family after he passed until my grandmother passed. And then when she passed away, didn't hear hide nor hair of them at all, except for the one dream visitation. So that's a great question. I don't know if they can come back in a shadowy form after they've already passed on to that other side or crossover or whatever you want to call it. I can't rule it out because of the fact that, I have seen a human spirit, come out of the shadows into an apparition. I know what Rob has told me. I know what others have told me, but in those cases, it didn't really seem like they had crossed over yet. At least none that I can remember off the top of my head. But it would be interesting to conduct some investigations and go down that rabbit hole and try to figure out, okay, if this shadow that we're experiencing here is a human spirit, is it somebody that has just lingered around here for quite a while, or is it somebody that has passed on and has come back to visit or deliver a message or have some sort of purpose, and kind of run an investigation that way, see what kind of responses you get. It'd be interesting.
That's true, because the brother isn't the only one who's passed on in that family. Their father passed on too.
It could be somebody else.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. It's such an intriguing story, but I don't know. I hesitate to give any more details of the story, but it's I sit here and I think about it. I also think about the experience I had at the Palmer house. You mentioned that child spirits and you mentioned a child spirit in a shadow form. And I kind of cringe. Dave and I think we had the same opinion when it comes to child spirits and why would God ever, leave a child spirit behind. And I think the spidey sense goes off a little bit whenever you see a child spirit. And can that truly be a child spirit, or is it something malevolent? I remember when I was up at the Palmer, and I've told this story before on the show, but I'll recap it quickly for you. It was when I was in the throes of Charcot foot. My foot was very, very much broken, and I was on my 4-wheel knee caddy. And I had a group of newbies, so to speak, investigators, and we were doing an event up at the Palmer, and we were all sitting in the cafe, and we were hearing banging of pots and pans back in the kitchen, but nobody was back there. And I said, does anybody want to go back there or go up to the counter and investigate what the banging of the pots and pans are? And everybody went, no. And I said, oh, come on. You guys came all this way. You spent all this money, and you don't want to see what the banging of the pots and pans are back in the kitchen? There's nobody back there.
Yeah, that's what you're there for, right?
Yeah, right. And they were like, no. So, and then we had a couple of ladies in the group who claimed they were psychic, and they said, well, we think it's the spirit of a little boy who's being, who's being just a little bit rambunctious and wants to play. And I said, well, why don't you walk back there and find out? And they're like, no, we're fine right here. And I was like, oh, for the love of God. And so David yelled that it was time to switch, because we all switched out groups. We had, I think we had 40 people up there. So we had little groups of like 7 or whatever, and we were all switching out at the time. So as he was yelling for people to switch, I thought, you know what, I'm going back there to see, what's back there, because, there are apparitions up there, and there are shadow people up there.
Okay.
So I got on my little knee caddy, and I was going to get as close to the doors of the kitchen as I could. There's these little swinging doors of the kitchen, and there's this lunch counter. And I decided to play with it like you would any little kid. So I said, if these ladies were correct and it was some little kid, I was going to play with it like a little kid. And I said, if you're back there, I'm going to come back there. I said, if you want me to come back there, bang the pots and pans twice. And I heard bing, bing. I was like, oh, all right. I said, here I come. I'm coming back there. I said, if you want me to come back there, bang the pots 3 times. I heard bing, bing, bing. All right. So I said, I'm almost back there. You want me to come back there? Bang the pots and pans twice. Bang, bang. All right. I said, I'm almost there. I said, do you want me to come back there? Nothing. I was like, okay. So as I'm about to turn the corner, I'm right on the corner of the counter, and I'm having a hard time negotiating the counter, the rounding the counter, because it's a tight counter and there's not a lot of space, and I'm a big guy with my caddy. As I'm about to round the counter, out through the doors, like materializing through the doors, is this about 2.5 to 3 foot shadow person that just bang comes right through the doors.
Wow.
Stops like, whoa, I didn't expect to see you right there. Right? And then takes one look at me and then boom, bolts to the left and goes right through the wall, like right through the brick wall of the hotel, and disappears.
Wow.
And I thought, whoa, that was cool. And then I didn't even know there were 2 guys behind me. And the 2 guys go, holy bleak, did you see that? And then they run past me and they start photographing and flash photography and all this other stuff. I'm like, you're not going to find it now.
Yeah, it's too late by then.
Yeah, it's gone. But at that point, I'm talking to Kelly, the owner, and they truly believe that I shouldn't say they truly believe, but they have a belief that shadow person is either a small child or a puckwudgie, one or the other. They know that the spirit in the basement is a puckwudgie, and that shadow person is either a child or an elemental. They can't figure out which.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
I guess at this point I would lean more toward child, but I mean, I would have to, get in there and investigate and see if I encounter it and what my impressions might be. But I mean, it's totally possible that it could be a child spirit. It kind of reminds me of another one of the stories that I share is from my partner, Shauna. And there was a little boy spirit that she had encountered in a cafe that she used to work at. And sometimes it would appear as the little boy apparition, and sometimes it would just be the shadow. And his was a confirmed death on the site when it was just land. And he had climbed a tree because there was some sort of brawl or fight going on in town, and he had climbed up the tree to get a better view of the fight and fell out of the tree on that spot to his death. And people still see Byron there, but she had seen him both, as the boy and as the shadow, and both being playful like that. So, it very well could be.
Let me ask you this: have you ever been to Ohio State Reformatory?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally from Ohio.
Okay, so of the in front of the big picture window in the administration building. Mm-hmm. Have you ever watched the shadow people walk in front of that big picture window in the staircase?
I haven't specifically at that spot. I've seen different shadow people there at OSR, but I haven't really stood at that spot to watch them. Okay, I've heard the story though.
Okay, yeah, we've done a couple of trips there, but we were doing one trip with the Ghost Adventures guys there, and one big trip there, and I had the fortune, again with the bum leg, I had the fortune of sitting there with the people who couldn't climb the staircase. We were sitting at the bottom, and we were watching. We were sitting at the bottom and we were looking up the staircase, and one of the guys said, "Hey, if you look up the staircase, you can see the shadow people walking in the moonlight. You can see them walking back and forth. But if you look in the moonlight, you can see it's almost like a shooting gallery. You can see them walking, back and forth on the staircase. And depending on your vibration, if your vibration is high enough, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, and if you've ever heard of this before, if your vibration is high enough, you can emit a light out of your eye that can drive a shadow person away. I don't know if you know that or not.
I have not heard that one before. I do talk about vibration level and personal resonance in A Walk in the Shadows. Because what's interesting, and Shauna and I have talked about this quite a few times, is that I'll see more shadows than apparitions, and she'll see more apparitions than shadows. And so I believe that does have to do with your personal vibrational levels. Mm-hmm. So, but I haven't heard that about the eye before. Yeah,
and I happen to chase them away. I can't ever get them to stay around. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to watch them, and they're running away every time I'm watching. I can't ever get one to stay away. I actually, we were chasing them around Waverly Hills with Tina Mattingly and Chip Coffey. She said, "I've never seen shadow people run before like this, but I couldn't get them to stay around me. They don't like me.
They'd take off when you're in the room, huh?
Yep, they don't like me.
Go figure that.
Yep, but But yeah, we were sitting there and we were watching these shadow people walk across. It was weird. It was like a shooting gallery. They would sit and they would just walk back and forth like it was their job to walk back and forth in the stairwell.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to be speaking there at Parapsychon at the beginning of May, so I'll have to check that out for sure and see if I also see the shadow people walking there.
Yeah, especially if you get like a full moon in that split staircase in the administration building. You can sit and watch them walk across. If you sit in the bottom of the staircase in that split staircase, you can sit and watch them walk across. It's weird. It's definitely a weird phenomenon. I don't know why I bring that up to you, but it's of all things, it's bizarre. Let me ask you this. I want to bring up the belief of shadow people being of an alien nature. I've always found this intriguing. Do you, first of all, have any belief that shadow people could be of an alien nature?
Possibly.
Okay.
Possibly. Yeah. And that's another thing that I address in the book. I address a lot of different possibilities in that book, and aliens is one of them.
Tell me why you do or don't believe that aliens could be or that shadow people could be of an alien nature.
Well, a couple different reasons, and really, again, these are all theories. But if shadow people are interdimensional beings, and extraterrestrials, we have speculated at different times, could also be interdimensional beings or traveling here interdimensionally or using the astral plane somehow to project themselves here, it's possible that some of the shadows that we're seeing are actually these extraterrestrials that are doing these different things to travel here, coming from their own dimension or maybe their planet and utilizing that astral plane to manifest here. Another idea is that perhaps it is a cloaking device that they're using, that because they may not fully understand the physiology of how our eyes work, that while they may be thinking that they're coming down, checking out the human race, maybe you never know, maybe they're trying to decide if this is a planet that they could live on and cohabitate with us, and they want to study us, hence why many of these kind of stand there and stare at you. Perhaps this cloaking device doesn't fully work with our physiology, and we're seeing a shadow person, or some people even have talked about seeing the shimmer man, like they'll see a shimmer there in the corner or in the room somewhere. I've even heard of some looking like some sort of liquid man or something like that. So it could be some sort of cloaking device that's not fully working, and it comes across to us as this shadow instead. So there's a lot of different possibilities here.
Now, would it be counterproductive or counterintuitive to say that shadow people are not aliens because you don't see some of the stereotypical alien things happening around them, that they are too timid?
I think if, one of us traveled to another planet and we think that we're hiding in the shadows and, just trying to check these people out, we're trying to spy on them a little bit, and all of a sudden one turns to you and looks at you as if it just saw you. You might try to get out of there.
Yeah, true.
You might, it's just, to me, kind of a typical reaction from any sort of being.
Very true. Very true. With shadow people, is there a true danger to them? Is there anything that in your case files that you've seen that of a shadow person attacking another person, or any damage from a shadow person? There can be, and that is brought to me kind of more often than not. There's a lot of people out there that will say, all shadow people are evil, or they're the darkest of the dark entities and things like that. And to me, it's a mixed bag. I think shadow people are like people you have, and it's very simplistic, I know, but some people are good, some people are bad. Some shadow people are good, some shadow people are bad. I've heard a lot of reports and stories about different things, like one particular shadow person lifting a woman off the bed by her ankles. A lot of the hat men will seem to come into the room and instill a fear upon the person, and then act like a energy vampire and try to feed off of that fear. The case that I worked on when we filmed for The Haunted back in 2010, we had Carl Johnson come in for that and do a cleansing of that house. She was experiencing a shadow entity with red eyes that would notoriously show up in her closet. It would show up elsewhere in the home. Her brother saw it, her father saw it. But for the most part, it was terrorizing her. It was terrorizing the cat. It was doing a lot of things to disrupt that home. And so we ended up, pushing it out and cleansing the home. So there's been there's a lot of cases in which these things are up to no good. So in that, with that being said, is it easy to get rid of a shadow person? Is it a typical, should I say, is it a typical incantation, or I shouldn't say incantation, but is it something where you could say a quick prayer and get rid of it? Is it something where you could wish it away? Or is it harder to get rid of a shadow person than most?
Well, I'll tell you from my experiences. When we did that cleansing with Carl, that one was a tougher one. When by the time we'd gotten to, well, let me back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we're just starting doing a regular, what you would consider a cleansing of the house, doing the sage, the salt, the holy water, all that, the prayers. The girl Taliesin had come back into the house. She was an adult daughter. It's not like she was a little girl, but we had the family staying outside. She came back into the house to use the restroom, and she started talking at something against the wall. We didn't see it with our own eyes. Carl decided to do a blessing over her. And as he's doing this, she all of a sudden doubles over in pain, like she just got punched in the gut. And when I went back over my audio later, there was an EVP right there that said, die. So something was definitely out to get her. Just after that, we got her to her feet. She was okay. Carl continued on, but it was just after that the back door to the master bedroom kept blowing open. We'd shut it, and it'd blow open again. It's happened like 3 different times. Carl ended up blessing the door. We had the tri-field meter set up over by her closet where she was experiencing a lot of the activity. That starts going off like crazy. So all these different things are happening and going on. We continue on with the cleansing and the blessing and push this thing out the door into the backyard, and the wind out there just kicked up something crazy, and it's whirling around. The cats are circling us. It was just, it was like something you would see. Honestly, it was something like you would see in a horror movie. That when you're doing the cleansing, because of the way that the wind was kicking up and everything was just spinning around, the cats going around in circles, and it's just nuts. Finally, that wind died down, was gone, completely stopped. Carl fell to a knee. He was completely exhausted. And what was really interesting was when we met back up with the family, they were hanging out in the side yard, which wasn't too far from where we were at. And we made some remarks about, wow, that wind got really crazy there. And the family's like, what wind? They hadn't experienced any of that wind whatsoever. So it was, quite a harrowing experience. Yet that said, there have been other times where it's been a little bit simpler. That just a few prayers and the thing seems to just go away. So it's really dependent on the situation and the entity that you're dealing with.
Now, have you yourself had an experience with, say, the Hat Man?
The Hat Man's one of the few that I actually haven't seen. I've seen what I would call the Wisp. The humanoid figure was the first one that I had seen. I've seen black mist, like a whole, it's basically like a vaporous cloud that's black. The smoke turning into the little girl. But the Hat Man is the one that I have not seen, although everybody talks about him.
When you say the Wisp, tell me a little bit about the Wisp. I guess I'm a little confused as to.
Yeah, the Wisp would be something that's very translucent, moves very fast. A lot of times these things are like tall, thin, narrow. Sometimes they could be smaller in nature as well. And they, for an example, just walking into a kitchen at a restaurant called Johnny V's, and I'm just, taking some photos, walk in, and this thing, it was like I scared it, and it darted across the room, but you saw the shadow. It was just very fast, very translucent. You couldn't really even see much of a form, but it was there,
Interesting. Let me ask you this, Mike. A lot of people have these experiences with shadow people, but are they calling these experiences upon themselves, or is it something where we just run into shadow people much like you would just run into people on the street?
I think a lot of times it's just we're running into them, or they may be, or it may be almost like their domicile, or maybe a place where they come into this world. Now, there are people that try to conjure stuff up and bring things home with them and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, we're happen to be running into these things, or maybe they happen to be finding us.
Reason why I asked that question is because we hear a lot about people saying stuff about like Ouija boards and if you play with that, you're bringing stuff upon yourself. Obviously, with dangers with shadow people think, well, am I bringing that? If I see a shadow, am I bringing that upon myself? It seems like shadow people and shadows in general tend to be the most common thing that people see. That's like the first thing people see when it comes to a haunting. And a lot of people think, well, did I bring that upon myself? Well, what did I do? if people tend to see something like that, isn't necessarily something that they did, I think is the first thing that someone's going to ask. And that's why I asked that question. Is that necessarily something that somebody did?
Yeah, not necessarily. And I think more often than not, it doesn't have anything specifically to do, with them initially. Mm-hmm. It may decide to, stick around and attach themselves to that person. But, yeah, you'll have times, you mentioned the Ouija board, where somebody might conjure something up. One of the places that we used to investigate back in the day was an old abandoned church, and there was some evidence there that there was some occult work going on in one of the back rooms by some group, and there were rumors about them having conjured up this crawler shadow entity, which we actually did experience there at that church. Now we can't specifically say that, well, yeah, they conjured this thing up, because we weren't there for any sort of ceremony, but people have linked the two together, and it very well could be.
Let me ask you this. Is there any correlation between shadow people and the jinn?
That's a good question. So there are a lot of people that believe the shadow people are jinn, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I mean, I think some people, or some shadow people, could be jinn, but there are people that think that all shadow people are jinn, and I don't believe that. But given that the jinn are supposed to be, trickster in nature, which some of these shadow people seem to be, the jinn are supposed to be interdimensional entities, which a true shadow person is an interdimensional entity. Some could actually be jinn. Okay.
I know I mean, the similarities are very, very close. In that, I guess the physical similarities are very close. But I guess, I don't know, culturally, would you say they're very close as well?
Culturally, well, I mean, that's an interesting thing about shadow people, because they're in all cultures, where jinn are Arabic in nature, at least as far as their legends are concerned, and where those stories came from was from that part of the world, where shadow people tend to be universal, and you have stories about these type of entities dating back into all cultures for millennia. So I think, if we take a look at the universe in that world that we can't see, I mean, they're probably related somehow. Maybe there's some sort of interdimensional cousins or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily think they're the exact same thing.
Is there a I'm trying to think of how I want to put this too, and try to tie this in. Much as there may be a cousin in a way to the jinn in shadow people, is there a hellish connection to shadow people? In other words, is there a demonic connection to shadow people in your mind?
Yeah, I do have a chapter in there on demons, and when we did that, when we had that case out in Oklahoma for the haunted, Carl did end up, he's a demonologist, and he did end up deeming that particular one a demon. So, yeah, some of these can actually be some sort of demon. Now, a lot of people try to say all of these things are demons, but I have people come to me with, a candle fell off their mantle and they think it's a demon, mm-hmm. Which we know that's not usually the case. So, I think we tend to fear what we don't understand. So not all these things are evil just because, the thing is dark and it might be standing in the corner and it's creepy. Even if it has, red eyes, it may not necessarily be demonic. I have a story in there about one particular red-eyed entity that just kind of stood at the window and stared in at this woman. It didn't do anything evil, nasty, or nefarious other than the fact it was kind of creepy staring in through the window. But yeah, some of them are actually some sort of demonic infestation, unfortunately.
Want to remind people the book is called A Walk in the Shadows, A Complete Guide to Shadow People, and our author is Mike Ricksecker. Mike, with shadow people, what is the most dangerous thing if someone does see a shadow person? What's the most dangerous thing that could happen to a person if they come across a shadow person?
Well, I mean, people have been physically injured. It's rare. It doesn't, happen a lot, but, there's a lot of unusual cases. I mentioned the one woman getting picked up off the bed. Mm-hmm. The old hag syndrome is related to all of this as well. So, there's been an interesting case in which, a couple of them. One where, it was the old hag sitting on his chest, pushing down, and he was able to move. He wasn't actually paralyzed, mm-hmm. But he was actually able to shove this hag off of his body. She had physical mass, and was able to get her off. Another interesting one related to all that with the old hag syndrome and shadow people was she woke up and it was a dire wolf that was on her chest, or was like in the shape of a dire wolf. And she's screaming and struggling. Her husband woke up. He didn't see the wolf, but he saw the impressions from the paw prints, from the paws on her shoulders. Mm. So yeah, people can get hurt by these things. But again, those are more the exception than the norm.
So there have been no documented cases of possession or anything like that having happened from a shadow person.
Like the case with Taliesin in Oklahoma, she was, if we had not intervened, she may have gotten to that point. She was absolutely oppressed. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like this thing was making strides to try to possess her from some of the different behaviors she was exhibiting that were not herself.
Okay.
But that was more of, it was a shadow entity, you would say, but that was one that was demonic in nature.
Okay. As we close out today, give us, we always ask for one creepy story to close. Do you have one really, really creepy shadow person story that you can leave us, whether it be a case that you've been on or one that you've heard, shadow person story that will kind of curl the hair of our audience as we leave tonight?
Yeah, so I can... I mentioned the crawler earlier, that entity that may have been conjured at that abandoned church. Mm-hmm. So when we actually encountered that, we were investigating the basement of this particular church, and we had seen a shadow slip in through one of the windows, and it started circling us along the walls, along the ceiling, and it's just this mass of like long spindly arms, long spindly legs, and it was super fast. It knocked something on the floor. You heard it bang the railing. Our electronic equipment was generating all kinds of crazy static, and it's just circling us. So the medium that we were with at the time suggested that we start saying prayers and singing hymns, which we did to bring more positive energy into that atmosphere. And it's circling us. And finally, we were able to create enough energy that it darted back out that window from whence it came.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right. The book is called A Walk in the Shadows, A Complete Guide to Shadow People. Our guest is Mike Ricksecker. It's available right now on Amazon.com. It will also have a link in the description of this show. Mike, want to thank you very much for joining us today on Beyond the Darkness.
Absolutely, Tim. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Folks, again, Dave will be back with us next week. And join us again for more episodes here on Beyond the Darkness. Again, check us out for more updates on darknessradio.com and on our social media as to changes that are coming up here on Beyond the Darkness. Again, we've got some exciting stuff coming up. We've got some changes coming up here that we want to keep you updated on, and be sure that follow us on our social media to keep you updated by the minute as to what's going on. Again, we're going to be growing, changing, and some great stuff coming up in the next month or so. And we'll let you know minute by minute as to the different outlets that we'll be adding to Beyond the Darkness. And we've got great guests like Mike and bigger and better guests coming up. We've got more outlets that we'll be adding to Beyond the Darkness and much, much more. We've got some exciting stuff coming up, folks. Again, I hate to be so glib about it and so kind of secretive about it. I hate to be secretive about it, but we'll be revealing more and more in the upcoming weeks. So for Dave Schrader, I'm Tim Dennis. We will be back with you next week here on the best in Paranormal Talk Radio. This has been Beyond the Darkness.